You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
Today they took out bank and armor for over $300,000. When I introduce you, I'm gonna say, this is a friend of mine. That means you're connected then. Now, if I said instead, this is a friend of ours, that would mean you were made guy. Like a bitch. Who's this guy? This is Donnie, a friend of mine. I'm off to school, my friend. School mean what? This guy never carries his money in a wallet. He's always in a roll.
You want your brains all over that wall?
You gotta get rid of that mustache and get yourself a pair of pants. Just like me. In our thing, you get sent for, you go in alive, you come out dead, and it's your best friend that does it.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare, from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
We're talking cool Elliot Gould and his complicated relationship with LA and his cat, so join the sleaze.
We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for over 3 years. So there's something like 70 plus, maybe even getting up to 80 plus. I have no idea. I've lost track.
Yeah, sign
there
up.
There are a lot of bonus episodes.
Come on, if you're listening, sign up. Toss the
sign
boys
up.
a buck or two. Come on now.
Appreciate
That's
it.
what's up. So there are a lot of bonus episodes waiting for you. Patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. Speaking of which, we have a lot of people who made the jump this week, so I'll give them their shout outs here.
Nice.
We had Lorne Kilgore,
Cool name.
Clay North. Oh my, Boyo?
Is it just Boyo,
guys,
like Bono?
Maybe. It's just Boio. Interesting.
Nice.
James Harrington signed up, and James Harrington, worth noting, he signed up at our new tier, which is an annual tier. So he signed up for a full year of the podcast, which is now a thing
killer.
you can do if you want to get a discounted, slightly discounted monthly rate. So thanks to James Harrington for being the first one to do that.
Yeah,
I just added that feature like a month ago, so thanks, James. And then we also have Nathan. So thanks so much to all of you folks for signing up this week. Hope you're enjoying those bonus episodes. That's the one plug. The other plug, Apple Podcasts. If you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts, and I see the stats, I see you right now listening on Apple Podcasts. I know that you're out
We
there.
see you.
Scroll down to the very bottom right now. Give us a good old rating and review down there. Helps us climb the ranks at iTunes and find new listeners. And then the very last plug is merch. If you guys like the poster art that local horror artist Trevor Henderson did for the show, you can get that basically now put on anything you want. A sweatshirt, a hoodie, a
Get that
notebook,
drip.
a pillow. Exactly. It's out there. You'll find the link in the description if you're interested in any sort of merch, as well as at sleazoidspodcast.com. But that is it. The intro is done. Welcome back to another week. I am your host, as always, Josh Lewis, and joining me, as always, my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back.
Welcome. I think 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks would have heard from us, and we would have been doing the big Dolph Month episode, the one everyone was waiting for. We had special guest Cameron from the podcast About List show on, and he brought with him Universal Soldier from 1992, directed by Roland Emmerich, Van Damme versus Dolph. A lot of fun to talk about. We also got to talk a little bit about the direct-to-video sequels that John Hyams has been doing, which are incredible. Jean-Claude and Dolph both still killing it.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was a fun 90s action sci-fi programmer, which was then paired with Dolph, who in that film went villain mode, going a little bit maniacal, a little bit Casualties of War meets the Terminator a little bit with Dolph on that one. In the follow-up one, which was the pairing Johnny Mnemonic, we got to see him.
Oh, that's a good pairing, actually. I love Johnny Mnemonic.
So good, man.
Try and chop off
banger.
Keanu Reeves' head as a crazy psycho priest who is being paid by Takeshi Kitano.
And he's got long metal hair and a giant beard. It's fantastic.
his Bible is his telephone screen, and he has a crucifix knife and everything. Either way,
man.
very fun Dolph movies to talk about, and Johnny Mnemonic, just an awesome film in general by William Gibson and Robert Longo. So that was 2 weeks ago. That was the free episode on any podcast listener of choice for anyone who missed that. That was a fun one. And then last week, for the bonus listeners over on Patreon, we wrapped up Dolph Month, where we talked about 1996 Silent Trigger, directed by Russell Mulcahy, who did like Highlander. A very surprising banger, which I programmed originally thinking that it was just going to be Dolph Lundgren, 90s action programmer, with him with a sniper rifle in a giant tower, disobeying his assassin bosses. But it turned out to be like this really weird horror movie / romance movie where he tries to escape the life of being an assassin with his sexy spotter partner. And the very minimalist horror design of the tower, it was almost like experimental theater-esque, and the romance was surprisingly thought through in terms of the character. So a very surprising one to end on, because it was the start of Dolph's like direct-to-video phase, that he had such a banger in the late 90s. And then the pairing with that was Blackjack, which is a film that like no one has seen.
I was about to say, I've never even heard of that. I don't think.
Directed by John Woo.
Crazy.
Which is insane. That
and it has
it's
plenty
not,
of Woo-isms too, which I was
it's not
about.
More talked about. But yeah, that one has Dolph Lundgren playing a U.S. Marshal turned bodyguard who is a magician and uses playing cards as tools of violence in John Woo set pieces, where he, there's exploding flying dirt bikes and Dolph dual wields while jumping on a trampoline. Dolph's character also has a crippling fear of the color white.
Oh man!
So milk
which the villains do use against him by weaponizing giant piles of milk that they throw at him and bed sheets and other things that happen.
I love every time you say it. It's just amazing.
Yeah, and this was a TV movie. That was only turned into a TV movie because it was a failed TV pilot that they originally intended to make into a show, which was going to be written by one of the head writers on the Miami Vice television show,
and was probably going to be a banger.
Hollywood had no idea what to do with John Woo, did they?
Probably not.
Yeah.
And the thing that's crazy is that it absolutely is a TV movie, and you can tell it's a TV movie, and John Woo still gets crazy stunt set pieces in there.
It's amazing that it's a TV movie.
Yeah, definitely a surprise for us, and definitely worth checking out. And again, that was last week's bonus episode, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast, if you're interested in that. But we are officially done with Dolph Month. It's over. We talked Dolph Lundgren.
We will miss
Thanks
him.
for calling in, man. We were very stoked about that. And we are moving. We are moving. Yeah, but we are, we're going to come back to him at some point, but we're taking a break. We're going back to regular scheduled programming. And you probably already heard him jumping in a little bit beforehand here, but we have a very special returning guest joining us, someone we always love to see his tweets and see when he's coming on. That is Nick Usen. Nick, how you doing?
I'm good, guys. Yeah, sorry, I have no podcast etiquette. I love to just jump right in.
No,
we loved it. It was great.
And,
it was
and
great.
give
No
my
one
2
else
cents.
does it. No one else has the confidence to pull it off, to even go for it. But no, we love having you on, Nick, and we were glad. I was so glad when you said that you would come back on again, because I knew that you had we had a fun time talking with you last time. We did To Die For and A Perfect Murder. We kind of talked 90s erotic thrillers, but I knew deep down that, as much as we enjoyed talking about those films, and To Die For was a banger, that we know what your true passion is in film.
That's right.
I'm sorry to say, I think most people do.
No, and that's by design, to be clear. Like, I've tried to pivot my Twitter where it's just like, I'm tired. You know what? I was like, I'm just going to post about like organized crime from now on. This is just going to, no one can get mad at me about my organized crime opinions, because I'm the only person who has read enough to have an opinion. So,
So I knew when we invited you on that might be the direction you take us, and you did not disappoint. So as it goes, Nick, the guests bring on the films. So what films have you brought with you this week, and why do they pair together?
So I brought two of my favorite movies. The first is Across 110th Street, which is a really sort of fun, very violent, I would say almost like grindhousey type film, where it has one of my favorite poster taglines ever, which is, if you steal $300,000 from the mob, it's not robbery, it's suicide. And to me, it's the way I ended up watching the movie the first time is I saw that tagline and I said, say no more. I hit play. I think I saw it on Turner Classic one time. And and so it's as the tagline says, it's about a group of guys who rob a mob numbers racket up in Harlem. And it's sort of a race against the clock by these New York City detectives played by Anthony Quinn and Yaphet Kotto, two favorites of mine, to find these guys before the mob does. And then I paired that with a film that I consider to be a masterpiece due to its accuracy and the way it captures its subject matter, and that's Donnie Brasco, starring the singular Al Pacino and Johnny Depp. And I'm really thrilled to have the platform to talk about these two movies, because I don't see them talked about as much, and definitely. Oh, and if I didn't say, they're obviously both mob movies, which is why I thought they would be a good pairing. But obviously, Goodfellas, Casino, Irishman, Mean Streets, anything Scorsese gets talked about into the ground, Godfather, etc., and for good reason. But I obviously wanted to try and bring two movies on this subject matter that don't necessarily get talked about as much. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that.
Absolutely.
No, we're very stoked to talk about kind of like the B sides of the mob genre that maybe people aren't talking about as much, and very interested to get your expert opinion, having read everything about this shit, because I honestly haven't, so I don't know. So I'm expecting to learn a lot on this episode.
I know, dude. I'm a sicko, and you know what? I feel like I need to give this disclaimer that I've had to work on this in real life to explain this issue too. I'm not like a weird fanboy. The best way I can describe it is I'm a boomer, but instead of World War II, I just like reading about the mob.
Right. So you're saying you're not like one of those true crime sickos who are like, Manson is my friend.
Yeah, like these guys are scumbag criminals. Like, let's be clear. However, it's like this. I've always been fascinated by niche subject matter, niche cultures, and the mentality behind this. Why this institution known as La Cosa Nostra, the American Mafia, even exists today. It defies logic, right? And so that's fascinating to me. And we'll talk more about this, and one of the reasons why I like these movies is, but you got guys who are constantly facing decades in federal prison who are making less than you would probably working at Five Guys,
Right.
And
right.
it's so what's the motivation, right? And at this stage of the game, it's become this weird circular loop of, well, now you have guys who grew up on all these movies, and so that's why they do it. But anyway, we'll get into this more. But so yes, to be clear, just think of me as a boomer, but instead of wearing like my World War II hat, it's like a Little Italy hat or something.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that's as good as any introduction as we're gonna get, and we are gonna jump right into these films here. We're gonna tackle them, I think, chronologically, and we are going to start with Across 110th Street. All right, we are talking Across 110th Street, the 1972 American action crime film directed by Barry Shear and starring Yaphet Kotto, Anthony Quinn, Anthony You might have to get my Italian pronunciation right here. Franciosa?
I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to. I gotta see.
Franciosa, maybe, and Paul Benjamin are the main actors here. Nick might correct me in a second if I was.
And also too, Anthony Quinn executive produced it, which I found interesting. So he had a big hand in who got cast.
Well, because I saw that he originally didn't want to play the character at all, that he actually tried getting Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas and John Wayne at one point.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm happy he ended up stepping in the... Did you see the thing about the Yaphet Kotto role, though? About how... I guess he originally had Sidney Poitier lined up to do it.
Oh, that's funny, because I was going to compare this to In the Heat of the Night a little bit.
Yeah, and I guess he talked to residents in Harlem, and they said that he wasn't real enough. Like, he wasn't an accurate representation of, like, someone from Harlem. And so he ended up casting Yaphet Kotto instead. And again, my research is like the Wikipedia page, so who knows if that's true. But if it is true, I found that interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talked about Yaphet probably at this point just a couple of months ago when we did Truck Turner with Isaac Hayes,
nice.
which Yaphet is just really awesome as the big pimp that Truck Turner eventually has to take down. Well, and he got that really amazing moment that was his idea, where he basically said, no, I won't play this kind of stereotypical pimp character, like, unless you give me, like, a really, intimate moment. And so they do this amazing thing in that film where Kaplan shoots him dying from the point of view of his eyes fading. And him like going down, and it's just such a weird, sad moment of Isaac, because it's such a fun blaxploitation action film with like Isaac Hayes doing the music to his own sex scene and like singing the lyrics and everything, and like that's the kind of movie it is. And then Yaphet Kotto, got to have his own imprint on it, on the character that he played. But Paul Schrader's Blue Collar, he's amazing.
One of my favorites.
Obviously, Alien. I haven't seen it, but apparently he's super good in Midnight Run.
He is good in Midnight Run. He's even good in that crazy Bond more. Live and Let Die.
Live and Let Die. Yeah.
Yeah. He actually brings some like gravitas. In a way, he was sort of like casting Mads Mikkelsen before Mads Mikkelsen. That was a big get, which I didn't appreciate when I was a kid at the time. But
he also goes up against Arnold in The Running Man, right?
Oh, yeah, he does.
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yes, he does.
What was his character again? Do you remember just briefly? What was his like characteristic? Because they were all weird. There's like hockey players and shit. I can't remember.
Yeah,
but anyway.
I'm blanking on exactly which one he was now.
Isn't that when he had? I feel like he also wears a headband in a lot of like. I always when I think of Yaphet Kotto, I think of him with like a headband on.
He definitely has that.
I think he wears one in like Alien and Blue Collar.
I love him.
Great.
He's
awesome.
Blue Collar so much. But yeah, it's a very it's a fitting casting too, because up until this point in his career, he was a lot of the time getting roles in kind of blaxploitation films, and that's what's sort of interesting, is that this is Across 110th Street is like kind of like a perfect merging of what the blaxploitation film crime film was kind of looking like. It reminded me a little bit of Larry Cohen's Black Caesar, which we talked about, which was trying to bring the old school Warner Brothers gangster films, like something like literally Little Caesar,
right,
with like Edward G. Robinson, but making it Black Caesar and bringing it into sort of like the modern 70s, sort of street crime kind of context. And it does that a bit as more. That one's more of like a character piece tragedy of this dude who suffers, sort of like this inciting racist violence as a child, and then that sort of trauma kind of like inspires him him to rise the ranks and become successful and make sure that never happens to him. And the big climactic moment of that film is him like literally putting the cop who abused him into blackface and then beating him and thinking he's the cop and like imagining him doing that.
I think he beats him with the shoe shiner platform too. Like it's very, very specific.
Yeah, and it sounds really ridiculous, but surprisingly, the way that Fred Williamson plays it and the way that Larry Cohen films it, it's surprisingly like a really sad, heartfelt moment. And I felt some of that going into Across 110th Street here, which Nick, I think, aptly pointed out. Like, part of it feels like a kind of grindhouse film that you would go and it's cheap and it's fun and the shootouts are really loud and bloody and you would and there's definitely some real grindhouse entertainment value out of this film. But like Black Caesar, I also found this film really depressing.
This film is so dark. It's just
nobody comes out on top. It's just like a meat shredder, essentially.
Well, and the ways that it tries to incorporate like the civil rights history of Harlem at the time, obviously 110th Street being the dividing line between Central Park and Harlem, and the way it tries to incorporate, like real race and class history of the late 60s, when Harlem, saw a lot of police violence and a lot of riots, a lot of stuff that you can kind of still see today in the U.S., but it was, very exacerbated and very enclosed into a specific space.
Right.
There were very stark class divides at this time, which the film, integrates then into its actual storytelling. And I think it's done very well, where you get this depiction of kind of like poorer, more desperate kind of, black criminals trying to knock off the mobsters because, they don't live in these communities that they are fucking with. They actually live across the divide and they live in these nice places. So it's kind of like they face racist violence from kind of like the rich white mobsters, and also they face racist violence from also the police at the same time. So the way that they see it is that if we knock off the mob and we get money, we can get the fuck out of here, because anyone else who could have afforded to get out of here, like anyone in the middle class, already did at this point in New York's history. So all that was left was basically just the dilapidated buildings, which, by the way, they all shot in this film on location.
Yeah,
was something.
Why it's so good. It's why it's a must-watch, in my opinion, because it captures New York that just doesn't exist anymore. It's up there almost with like Taxi Driver or Mean Streets, I think, in how it captures something that just doesn't exist.
Yeah, like the moments in they'll go into those deep alleyways where it's just covered in trash. It almost looks like a junkyard in a way, just because it's like those areas have been forgotten about by the city. And it actually reminded me of the ending, and they go there a couple times throughout, but in Black Caesar, where he ends up, it kind of becomes his grave almost.
He returns home.
Yes,
and his home is getting like basically beaten to death by a bunch of young children in basically a similar kind of looking alleyway. Yeah,
and those images just reminded me of that film specifically, and similar themes are brought up as well. So,
well, yeah, and it's a similar thing that Larry Cohen, very famous for his guerrilla style of filmmaking through New York City, where he never got any permits to film anything, and he used the fact that he was in New York as like his biggest sort of budgetary value, which was that you didn't have to build any amazing locations; you had amazing locations on you, and they took the same mentality when making this film, where they from what I understood, they told Scheer and Quinn that they would prefer they actually didn't shoot on location, just because it was still a lot of this stuff that they are dealing with politically was still happening in the time in the place that they were filming.
Right.
But Scheer was able to convince them to use these new sort of like Arri Flex 35 cameras that they used, which I read were very revolutionary at the time for being so small and lightweight, which is why you get so many incredible images of them being able to move through these very tight New York built spaces. Like there's so many like medium close-ups, tracking shots, handheld, like following them like through these like dingy staircases into like these really cramped bathrooms and everything.
Sense of place.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You really get that feeling of like the cramped apartments and the really sort of like authentic kind of rundown quality to that they are aiming for in the story, and it really emphasizes, you know, the desperation and things that these characters who in the opening scene are knocking off the mob are trying to escape from. I thought that was what was kind of radical about it, was kind of the structure. Was that the opening scene of this film is literally the bloody massacre heist, where you don't know who these people are, you don't know why it is that they're doing. All you get to see is them break in, steal this money, and viciously murder everyone.
And they're dressed as cops as well, right? They're disguised.
Yes.
Yeah. So that image of like just these people dressed up as police and taking down both the Italian mob and the black mob is like that. There is it really sets the tone for what we're about to see. All these factions just kind of coming together and going after each other.
Well, and it's just so interesting because it doesn't prime you to sympathize with people who would do something like that, right? And I think that's intentionally what it's going for. And then the rest of the film is laying out the reasons and conditions that led to that happening, and you realize that these people are absolutely just a symptom of something far, far worse, which we'll get into in some of the character specifics, like the Paul Benjamin character, who references, you know, his history of, you know, being in prison and being uneducated and disabled and basically having no forward momentum of any kind, and basically just being shit on by everyone. But it's interesting that it saves that kind of, you know, reasoning and empathy for later in the film. It opens on the shocking violence where you just get to see
Right.
Paulie from Rocky just fucking massacred.
Clipped. Yeah. Well, it's important too, right? It's like who is killed too in that opening, right? It's three Italian mobsters, two guys from the Black Cruz, and then two corrupt cops, right? Is, as you guys said, this unholy alliance. And one of the reasons why I love this movie so much is, again, it's very, very accurate to what was going on in New York at the time, the numbers racket, but more specifically the way Harlem worked in the way of the cooperation between the very famous sort of black racketeers like Bumpy Johnson, Frank Lucas, Nicky Barnes, and then the Italian mafia, because the Harlem was a mob stronghold forever, and famously at the Palma Boys Social Club, right below 110th Street in Harlem, was where Fat Tony Salerno of the Genovese crime family held court. And so we saw that in The Irishman, actually. When they went up to speak with Fat Tony, they went up to Harlem. And so it's you don't see this a lot in the movies, but like the mafia and these black gangsters, this was a very active and tight relationship, and the numbers rackets, which is what gets robbed in this movie, was for a long time one of the major money makers for the mob. Do you guys know what the numbers rackets are?
No.
So essentially what it was is, and this was millions and millions of dollars, it was the lottery before the lottery. And essentially the mob had a bunch of kids, numbers runners, who go around all neighborhoods, the whole neighborhoods, and everyone would pick numbers. And then all the slips would get brought back to these number spots run by the mob, or controlled by the mob, and then run by the black gangsters. And the winning number, the way they would pick it was usually the numbers of the winning horses throughout the day at the racetrack that day. I forget which track they used. And so that was, and truly made millions and millions of dollars for the mob. And it was something that everyone did. Like every single was famous in Harlem and all the boroughs of New York. So this is something also that would happen, right? Like occasionally young kids who, as you said, just were the wild cards, would try and knock over these spots, and then usually something like this would happen. So again, one of the reasons why I like this movie so much is not only is this like a mob movie or an organized crime movie, it actually is a very ground level and accurate depiction of this time and place.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I didn't realize that, you would think that some of it would be emphasized, and some of it on a character level is probably emphasized for a little bit more dramatic effect. But yeah, I did not realize that this was literally the kind of thing that, people would try to do to get a leg up in Harlem if you were particularly desperate. Because it the way that they depict it, like it is really filthy, like 70s red paint,
ruthless.
squibs. The shooting and the cutting of it is really intense. Like it's a really messy scenario. Like when they break in and they hold everyone up, and there's a montage of them like counting and licking their fingers and writing in the book and flipping through the cash and everything like that. And
a
then they come in
well-oiled
as the
machine.
cops.
I think that's a very Michael Mann moment too. I've always
Yes.
felt that like that's such a. It's all silent too, right? It's just guys who like. I love that opening because I'm like, how many times have these guys done that? Which makes the robbery to me all that more shocking because
Right.
that sense of purpose of like worker bees almost is
they know what
they
they're
would
doing.
never have expected that, right? And so I'm already like, these guys must be insane to rob these people if this is how they were acting previously.
Yeah, and there's lots of like tense inserts and everything like that as they're all like being like, who's gonna make the first move, and they end up gunning them down and running their way out. And there's this amazing moment where there's like shots inside the car, sort of like William Friedkin style, as they're trying to drive away, and the guy's trying to do like a 3-point turn. Lots of really great handheld camera work, and that's in close proximity to the action, and as Nick kind of pointed out, like the ground level, the street level, as well. You really feel like you're. I think it was a friend of the pod, Jacob Knight, in his review of this, he described it as, it feels like you're riding shotgun with these guys who just knocked over the mob, and you really feel that the intimacy and the intensity of that. And then we're shortly after introduced to the cops that are going to be in investigating what's going on here. We have Anthony Quinn playing Captain Frank. And then we have Yaphet Kotto, who is playing William Pope, and is kind of like the young and more formally educated officer who is trying to change the way things are kind of from the inside a little bit, versus Anthony Quinn, who is very much a very old school, right at a 50s noir cop, who is very, very violent and racist a lot of the time in the film.
Which also, I guess, would probably have been pretty accurate for the time. But yeah, it's very much like, they're not breaking any new ground here with this relationship. And that's why, this movie is, as much as I love it, like, it has its limitations, right? Like, this is a very sort of stock relationship. But I think the chemistry between Anthony Quinn and Yaphet Kotto is very good.
Yeah.
I just have to correct myself. I realized I said Palma Boy Social Club was below 110th Street. They were actually the 116th Street crew. I believe it was on 115th Street.
Do you know what? You would have been yelled at so much if you.
But
didn't
so
correct
I just
yourself.
couldn't live with myself. If the boys on the organized crime forum found out about that, they'd have my head. So
They would be like, Nick, I can't believe you said that. And
Yeah, just
everyone's
how
gonna
dare- how
leave
dare
talking about
you.
it.
I love the introduction with the cops going into the killing scene, because they're at first very confused about how it could be so like multiracial. They're like, just how did this happen?
Right,
Exactly.
right.
Like,
It's so
it's-
good.
Why are there
funny.
3 Italians hanging out with 2 black guys and 2 cops?
Yeah, it's like if it's not specifically related to one gang, they're just absolutely confused and befuddled, which I did like that detail. Just it's starting to get more of like a gray area that no one's understanding.
And Anthony Quinn also, the way that he plays his character is it's very weary and frustrated. The way
like
that he
tired.
plays his performance. Yeah, because he's the way that he sees it is he's been trying to kind of help the community for decades by just beating up all the various poor black guys.
Well, you know what? You know who he actually reminds me a lot of is Jeff Bridges in Hell or High Water. I see that. Just that weary cop, definitely a little racist, but he is still trying to solve the crime.
Right. Get down to the truth at the very least.
Right, and maintain, right, and also too, the reason I like organized crime movies too is they're all about movies about men with codes, right, moral codes, which is just, I know I have fellow man, I'm amongst fellow manheads, so it's like I'm all about movies about someone with like a code, and Anthony Quinn in this movie always struck me as someone who, like, this guy is a dirtbag, but he believes in something,
right.
Well, and he too, there are moments here when he works with Yaphet Kotto where he does start to, I think, feel the regret of the many years of actions that he's taken. Like at first he wants to help him, and by helping him he means he just wants to beat the witnesses up.
Right.
And then Yaphet Kotto was like, hey, we don't do that fucking shit anymore.
Will you please stop assaulting my witnesses?
Yes. And he's just like, well, what I do gets results. I'm tired of your liberal bullshit. And all they do is they cut down to the guy just like completely knocked out. And Yaphet's just like, I don't hear him talking to you. But yeah, no, I really like Anthony Quinn and Yaphet Kotto's relationship, because they're definitely trying to be the two sides of sort of like the old guard of law enforcement and what is meant to be sort of like this new force that is trying to be more liberal and sensitive and part of the community. But I think by the end of the film they kind of realize that what they are trying to do is kind of impossible. That no matter, even if you have someone like Yaphet Kotto inside, there's not much that he's going to be able to do that's going to change the situation. And both of them come head to head with just what it feels like a never-ending hydra that is sort of like these systems of crime that have been built.
Notes a scene I love in this too is in another thing that's like a hyper accuracy thing that I feel like you don't see a lot in these mob movies, is how the orders to Nick, the psychotic mob hitman, to go torture and kill these guys, comes at like the granddaughter's birthday party, and the boss is just this old man in a sweater, and he just sort of calls him over, and he's like, it's no good. We can't have this, and that's all the guy needs, right? And he's off like a bat out of hell, and that is like startlingly and almost shockingly accurate to like who these guys actually were. Like it was just, it's old Italian men in sweater vests are causing massacres in Harlem. And that's what was going on.
I also love the detail of when Nick gets the instructions from the older mafia guy. It cuts to him like kind of reading the instructions back to himself in the car, as if it's like constantly in his head to get this job done right, so that he's not whacked or whatever it is.
Yeah, because he's gonna get clipped too.
Yeah,
it's like he's like, you're going too. So.
Right. Yeah, I think he implies that it's like his last chance or something like that, which really does lead to this character being absolutely ruthless and brutal, especially near the end.
Yeah, he goes like full psycho mode. And what's interesting about that too, though, is that you can tell that he's also like kind of like an underling.
Yeah,
and
he's scared,
I wouldn't go as far as say that the movie has sympathy for him, but it lays out the conditions that lead to someone like him.
Exactly.
Which is, I think it's the Doc Johnson character who gets the to kind of point out that he just married into the mob. And, he's been an underling for however many years or decades, and he's going to be nothing but that. He's still, just doing, the job that other people don't want to do, which is go into Harlem and find the 3 guys who robbed us. Who, by the way, those guys are just having a blast with that money at first. Well, the one is.
Yeah, the one. Yeah.
Henry Jackson, I think, is the one who he was in Shaft and Foxy Brown and Putney Swope, and he gets a really sick pimp outfit with his money. And he starts outfit. Spending up everywhere, and Paul Benjamin is kind of doing that thing, which is funny because it's kind of like in Goodfellas, where he's like, don't go spending all of the money on flashy shit. They're gonna know who ended up with the money. They're gonna know who's richer than they should be, and Paul Benjamin's character is playing Jim Harris, and he is the one who kind of takes it a little bit more low key and seriously. And I thought I recognized him too, and it turns out that he's one of the old dudes who hang out next to the red brick wall and do the right thing.
Oh.
And because I was like, why do I recognize this guy's face? I absolutely know this guy. But I really like how they end up showing you the details of his life after they just stole, what was it, $300,000, but then they show him back in the building that he works at, where he's basically like a janitor or a porter, and there's him like taking the phone call. There's that great shot looking all the way up the spiral staircase at all of the people yelling at him to go and like clean their toilets and shit.
It's so great. Yeah, he's literally like supposed to be the boss of Harlem. He's essentially supposed to be like a Bumpy Johnson stand-in, who was like, the guy in Harlem forever, but was always under the thumb of the mob, much like he is. And so that's this movie. I always like to joke is just like a bunch of middle managers like trying to kill each other to get a promotion, and that's why it's so good. It's not anywhere near the top. It's not people like not really involved. It's guys trying to make their way up the ladder like every other schmo.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I like too that he goes to his wife about the money, and she's just like, you got to give it all back, like that's the mob's money, like, and he was like, you think that after I just killed that many people, they're gonna just take this money back? And she's being like, the money talks, the dead are dead, and she's trying to convince him, that he can still get his way out of this, but he's basically like, either I'm getting away with this with the money,
or I'm dead,
or I'm dead. And that's that's basically it. And I love that she's just like, you have no chance of living out the week like this. And he essentially says, I had no chance before this week. I had no chance a month ago. I had no chance, the fact that this job went down because like he just recognized the accountant from work or something like that, and then he recognized the Cadillac, and like literally it was just a couple of coincidences that led him to know where they were going to be doing the counting. And then he was just like, I have no education, I'm disabled, and he even says to her own point, you need to get your mind out of that white woman's dream. He's trying to lay out the real very political desperation of his poor circumstances, and it's very interesting that they finally kind of introduce us to that version of them as they're laying out the actual investigation, because then it leads you to this thing where you're kind of like, I kind of like Yaphet Kotto and Anthony Quinn, and I kind of like this guy, and I would not like to see them maybe all kill each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, but of course they have to, right?
Right.
They've all been too tainted.
Watching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is the thing about this film, too. It's like, as I was watching it about halfway through, especially, you just realize there's no way out for any of these people. Like, it's kind of inevitable that it ends the way that it does. Still shocking, however, that last image, which we'll get to. But it's, that's all I could think is, like, I was just kind of watching people destroy themselves slowly, and by the end, that's essentially what you get as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's also some really great, like detail. Like one of my personal favorites, in a moment that I thought was just so bleak and so, it's so imbued, kind of like the racial contradictions of the film, which was when Nick DeSilvia, he's hunting down and slowly killing these guys, and there's some scenes where they get really
the scene
brutal,
in the
like,
nightclub's great.
Yeah, I mean, like, really great club photography, so flashy, and the dancing and the music and everything, but then Nick comes in, and he's behind this, like, shadowy barrier behind the staircase, and then he comes in, and what's so interesting about this is that, you know on some level on the plot that this obviously had to happen, because it's the mobster coming back and beating up the guy who stole from him. So, you won't go as far as to say that necessarily he's in the right or anything, because all of them are in some ways tainted by what they do.
But we know it's going to happen.
but we know it's going to happen. We know why he's going to do it. But he just also has to be super racist while he does it.
Yeah.
So he's throwing around slurs while he's just like absolutely beating the shit out of this man. And they end up finding him.
It's like comically racist. He's
insanely racist.
I think
he's sort of a come town character, just like insanely racist Italian cop.
I think he even smacks one of the dancers that runs up to him.
Yes.
So he's just on a rampage. Anyone that's in his way is getting the fist.
Well, yeah, and they eventually find that guy like crucified with like his eyes pulled out and shit like that. And they, he ends up, Anthony Quinn's trying to like interrogate him in the back of the ambulance and everything. And so this last guy's last moments were just like experiencing a vicious like hate crime, and then having the cop being like, you're already dead. Like, you need to tell us, you need to give us this fucking information, and all of this kind of stuff. And a great way that I could tell, because at first I wasn't sure like how intentional this was meant to be read as any racial commentary, and then it was all confirmed in the scene where he finds the second guy, and he absolutely beats the living shit out of him. He eventually looks like he's about to like lynch him, but he ends up hanging him upside down to scare the shit out of him over top of the building that he finds him on. And it's a great sort of like chase scene leading up to it and everything like that.
A lot of good rooftop stuff too.
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of blaxploitation stuff had really awesome rooftop chases, and people running through like those little doors.
The layout of New York is so sick in that regard. Like, every rooftop seemed to connect to one another, so they have so many different platforms and elevations when they're doing
layers,
these running scenes. It's great. I love it.
And that was the genius of just shooting it there, right? That's why Barry Shear was like, "Are you insane? Like, of course we're going to shoot it in Harlem."
Yeah. It's going to look cool, and it's going to give us these really amazing, choreographed set pieces that we can do.
Yeah.
And the thing that's really noticeable about that scene where he catches the second guy, though, is that he gets even more racist with his targeting, and somehow
to levels previously unknown before the 70s.
Yes. And it cuts to Doc Johnson's men, sort of like the members of the Black Mafia who are there. And every time you just get these really intense, sweaty close-ups of their uncomfortable faces, watching as, this Italian man just like yells the N-word while, torturing this man essentially to death. And it's so interesting because, I thought almost dramatically it was going to lead to like they were going to jump in and, help the man out or something like that. But it's even more complicated than that. It's just this moment where like they recognize the racist dynamic that's taking place here, but it's so ingrained in the business that they know that they have to just let it go.
And it's just dog eat dog, right? They're like, better him than me. Is I think the way I've read it.
Yeah,
but I think a film that is less interesting wouldn't have included those edits. Like, they are 100%. So intentionally placed to make you feel the uncomfortable aspect of this Italian man just dishing out very overt racist violence. Despite the fact that if he didn't do that, in another movie, this would be again kind of like a dramatically justified moment of this guy stole my money. I'm gonna beat him up now.
I also find it interesting that he starts like almost being it's grossly playful with him. Like, he starts saying like, "Just tell me, baby," like while he's hanging him upside down. And then he also does this weird thing throughout the movie, which I just liked on a kind of a character actor perspective is that he takes two of his fingers and constantly like wipes the corner of his mouth with them at certain
It's a
points.
good tick. It's
Yeah.
a good bit of business. It's
I
for
really
sure a
like
good
that.
bit of business.
But yeah, I just wanted to bring those two things up because there's certain character ticks that he does that are really fascinating and kind of just adds to the grossness of his character.
Definitely. Well, and I really like too, because we haven't mentioned him, but Richard Ward is the guy who plays Doc Johnson in this. Obviously, he was in The Jerk, and I recognize him too.
Such a
from,
good voice. What a great voice.
Yeah. I was gonna say I recognize him from Mandingo, and dude, he sounds like he's been chain smoking for like 50 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
But also the little bit of power he's able to exercise over people. There's one
Including
absolutely
the Italian mob, which is really interesting dynamic with him.
Yeah, well, because there's one that obviously they have like a business relationship with them, that they the Italian mob realizes that they want to be bringing in
Right.
money from the poor black people who live in Harlem, but also you can tell that they want to give this guy enough power, but not enough power that he takes over. So there's an interesting sort of like dynamic that they play between Doc Johnson and the Italian mob, but then also Doc Johnson. And one of my favorite scenes, which is Anthony Quinn and Yaphet Kotto going to visit him, where Yaphet Kotto finds out that Anthony Quinn's character has actually been on the payroll of Doc Johnson.
Right.
And so that he actually was a corrupt cop, like helping this guy, despite the fact that, he cares about street level crimes and everything like that, he was still letting, the larger people behind those symptoms, go unimpeded. And he was saying that, he did it because, the force wasn't paying him much and, everything like this. And he tries to lay it out. But it's really interesting watching Anthony Quinn, who obviously came from a different period of filmmaking, kind of, wrestle with the fact that, to other people, the 50s noir cop just looks like kind of like this racist dirtbag, even though, he knows on his level that he has a better moral code than that. And you can almost see him very desperately like looking over at Yaphet Kotto, knowing how bad it looks and being like, oh my God, is this how I really look to people? And he's like freaking out that and having like an existential crisis over that. And I thought that that's just a really interesting way, and definitely a more, to approach that. And it's more interesting for Anthony Quinn's performance. He's filled with so much regret over that.
Yeah.
It's a great sweaty performance too. I feel like, I don't know if one of you said that already, but just a lot of great facial sweat. I feel like everyone was constantly sweating while filming this movie.
Yeah. Every single character is just at the pretty much the tail end of their life if they don't continue to do what they're doing. So everyone has a real sense of urgency in this movie. No one can just kind of lay back and hope that it all works out. Everyone is actively doing things to try to stay alive.
Yeah. Well, and I like the big climactic moment in that scene when Anthony Quinn tries to get Doc Johnson to basically like shoot him, and he's like, I'm not going to shoot you because I can see that you want to die, that you want to be crucified for your sins, and I'm not going to let that happen to you. I want you to wallow in your bottle of whiskey or whatever. And it's just such an interesting power dynamic to bring up in that scene. And yeah, I mean, eventually that leads to, they Anthony Quinn and Yaphet Kotto's characters are trying to hunt down the criminals to bring them to, a legal justice before the mobsters bring them to mob justice.
Right.
And what's interesting is they fail at doing that because Nick Da Silva gets to brutally and racistly just torture and murder very slowly these characters who we know are just like these poor, desperate guys. Which is, something very sad that you have to wrestle with in the film. And then you also get to see some of the aftermath very, I think, intentionally as well. Like, I think about the scene where Quinn and Kotto go to the wife of the first guy who gets killed, which is such a powerful scene where she has to like put on this face of like, this doesn't, I'm strong, this doesn't affect me, this is what living here is like. And then the second that they leave and that door closes, and it just holds for like an extra 5 to 10 seconds on that door, where you can just hear her sobbing behind the door.
It's brutal. Yeah,
it's brutal.
So brutal. Moving, brutal. It's great.
Yeah, and I just think that like little details like that is what really sent this movie over the top for me, because again, the actual action of the film, it's still exciting, it's still suspenseful, it's still watching these guys try to outrun the mob and the cops simultaneously, and like you get really awesome chase scenes and car chase scenes, and when the gunfights hit, they're really loud and they're very sweaty and they're very bloody, and
it's very lived-in movie. Yeah,
they're exactly what you hope for a kind of crime grindhouse affair. But then just throwing in these character details like this, just they make that violence kind of sting even just a little bit more. And there's really unique style to it as well. Like I think that I haven't seen, I don't think, anything else that Barry Shear's done, but like there's some really cool little choices in the filmmaking and in some of the editing. There's a really great cut where the one guy who's getting tortured by Nick Da Silva ends up like falling or getting pushed down, I think like stairs or an elevator shaft or something like that, and he screams into the void as he's falling, and then it cuts to Paul Benjamin like waking up in like this drug-induced haze, also screaming because of like a nightmare that he's having. And those two shots are like match cut together in a way that like connects them both, even though he's not having that violence come for him yet. He senses how close it is to him, and eventually it obviously does get after him too in the big climax of the film and everything.
Yeah, I also like that the one part, I think, is it Joe that's held up in the one place? He's the last one that remains with...
Jim Harris.
Yeah. They have that one line where they look at each other and he's kind of like confirming like he thinks that maybe they're going to make it. And right when he says that, the camera pans over to this absolutely filthy window and you see the mafia coming out of the car and into the building. And it's just, it's an instant sense of dread. You're just like, oh, fuck. Like, nothing good is going to come from this at all. Yeah. And luckily, Jim does kind of have a big fighting moment. Unfortunately, the girl does get shot in the head, and it's one of those things that he doesn't even notice at first. It's
so casual that she just takes a bullet to the head, and he doesn't notice until he runs back in the room again later after running out and killing Nick.
And Nick, like, he sends him through the window and everything. He falls down. At one point, he goes back out and he like blows a car up that crashes. It's pretty wild.
It has a truly wild climax, I would say. And as you mentioned, that final shot is just one of my favorites.
Oh, man. So cold.
Well, because I was going to say, too, in that climax, one of the craziest parts for me, which I don't even know if I want to know how they did it because it looks so dangerous, is that one where he goes outside and he starts shooting people in the streets from the people who are running away, and he shoots that one dude who tries to get in the car and drives away, and the car flips over and explodes.
Right.
And the one dude tries to get out of the car on fire. The man is completely on fire.
So gnarly.
Screaming, too, like he is in pain.
Yeah.
It's wild,
Yeah, so I was like really, shocked by that moment, because that's like a moment of insane stunt work not seen anywhere else in the film, essentially. But it just achieves that like that extra level of kind of violent cruelty to it, where it's like the guy just can't get shot through the windshield and die in the car. The car needs to flip, it needs to explode, and he needs to be screaming and trying to crawl his way out of the car
while he's burning alive.
Yeah, it's just that level, that extra level of severity to it is just really, really brutal. And then that leads into the big actual chase through the junky alleyways and the abandoned rundown buildings and everything. And Paul Benjamin just like hopping rooftop to rooftop, just like shooting cops down while they're chasing him and stuff like that. And a really cool moment in the score there too, where it adds in like this like classical percussion mixed in with what sounds like these like clanging wood chimes or something.
It's a very percussive score, which I liked. It kind of it just really drives those action scenes forward a lot and creates a lot of tension. But yeah, it's a very percussive score. I liked that a lot too.
Yeah, a lot of the blaxploitation movies had really, really cool little funky scores. Like
They did
And the
like
title
that with
song
percussion,
is
yeah.
is awesome.
Yeah, I was gonna say we didn't
I
even mention it,
forgot
but
Bobby Womack is just like, it's so good. I heard the song before I even I knew about the movie. So that's how you know you have a good song.
I found it interesting that one because I think Tarantino later re-recorded it for his movie, right?
Yeah,
because when I first heard it, I only actually heard Tarantino's version of it. Whoever ended up doing that for him, but that one's actually more upbeat, whereas this one has a little bit more melancholy feel to it, just slightly, which I thought was a suiting tone.
but yeah, that was how I first heard it too. I heard it in the title track, the title card for Jackie Brown.
Right.
And then I was like, damn, there's a movie called that? And I was like, oh, okay.
Just, wow, they made a movie?
I just like smacked
the
myself
song?
in the head. Yeah, but yeah, then you get the big chase climax where Paul Benjamin's being chased down by Anthony Quinn and Yaphet Kotto, and it's you're like, this is like the worst. It's so funny because at the beginning of the film you don't think that this is where you're gonna be, but you're like, can't everybody just go separate ways? Can't everybody just like, does this have to happen?
Yeah.
But of course, they have to shoot Jim down on top, and it's very brutal, and he gets a moment too that I think is really beautiful, where he gets to throw the bag of money over top of the building towards the kids playing below. And I actually thought, because the way that the movie functioned, I was like, if they shoot him off and he just falls and splats in front of all those kids, I was like, that would be just too mean.
That's too much, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, please don't. But that was where my mind was at. Like, that's how sad this movie is.
This movie is a kick in the nuts. But I think that's what makes it good. But yeah, thankfully they didn't go that far. But
is it Kotto the one that ends up shooting him, finishing him off, or is it another anonymous cop? Because I have it written down that I thought it was Kotto.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that it's Kotto, but it's in a dramatic situation where Quinn is in trouble. Like, that's the only reason that he does it, because you can tell that Kotto doesn't want to shoot this guy down because he's been talking to their families and he kind of knows their story a little bit more.
Yeah.
And he doesn't do it until he sees that Quinn is like in danger, and he thinks that he's going to get shot down. And then it doesn't even end up mattering because the mob is waiting across the street to shoot Quinn anyway.
Yeah,
which is the big
what a
final
shot
of the
too.
film.
Like, just
awesome
headshot, freeze frame on the headshot. Not even like the reaction. It's just he's dead, and I don't even think he hits the ground before they freeze frame. And then it's just the credits.
It doesn't even hit the ground.
No,
it's so matter of fact.
It freeze frames on them reaching for each other's hands.
Right. Just God, man, it's so sad. No one comes out on top here.
Yeah, a perfect ending to a movie that is that propulsive too. That is that sort of a life or death from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I really like the how kind of just matter of fact everything happens. It's so blunt and cruel and kind of gross with its violence that it absolutely makes sense that was where they decided that they wanted to end it, with just this kind of like, because Kotto starts out not liking Quinn.
Right.
And so he has a little, by the end, I wouldn't even necessarily say that, he really likes the guy, but he is definitely more sympathetic to him, realizing, that some of the choices that he's made were out of, desperation as well, and not necessarily out of malice. And, that's just, to end on, him coming to that realization, and then just watching, two people just get gunned down, and the actual system by the system that exists still outside, that they didn't actually accomplish anything. I think that's like the key to the movie, is that obviously Quinn, he's playing this aging racist noir hero who realizes too late that no one sees him that way, because he spent his entire career beating up poor black men instead of actually confronting the larger system of corruption. Actually, he was part of it, that they are a symptom of. But Also, that for the Kodo character, who has more liberal sensibilities regarding racism and police violence, that he just gets to see how firsthand, how useless, the NYPD actually is at, solving this issue, that it's so ingrained everywhere that, he's not actually, by just answering, to a stick up gone wrong,
Yeah.
he's not actually going to, change anything. And I think that that's ultimately what makes this movie like super effective for me. But yeah, maybe pivoting towards reductive rating round, this one gets a pretty strong 4 from me. I think that, for all the reasons that we've said, that it has a really sort of compelling observation of race and class tensions of late 60s Harlem, and as Nick has pointed out, that it took a lot of from the actual crimes that were taking place at the time as part of its story, and then very effectively incorporates the the derelict location detail of actually shooting in Harlem, and shooting with this very intense, close, handheld style of filmmaking that really makes you feel like you're on street level with these characters in these amazing locations. And then to also do that in what is undeniably a very thrilling on its surface genre piece, including crazy explosive chase scenes and really bloody gunfights, and these really suspenseful torture sequences and things like that. And to do all of that and ultimately leave you feeling very, very depressed and uncomfortable at these real class and race contradictions that have just been presented alongside what is the slow, brutal torture and murder of these these desperate people trying to survive, and then the just the sobs of their family members. By the end of the film, that's what you're left thinking about.
Yeah,
There's a whole lot of people in the morgue. That's all that's left.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really compelling way to tackle this story, is just to open on the heist. And then just make the actual film just the slow torture of all of the characters who did it, and you having a better understanding of why they did it, and their real material conditions and their emotional lives and everything. And it's just it's a really kind of cruel way of doing that, I guess, but I found it very effective. And I even watching it just for the first time, I found this very moving. And I wanted to also quote friend of the show, Steve Carlson. He has a very long review on Letterboxd of it that I would recommend everyone reading, but he had a really great line near the end of his review where he kind of addressed the fact that Paul Benjamin's Jim Harris and Anthony Quinn's character and Nick kind of fit a triangle of people trying to assert power within this system, and basically all of them end up kind of failing in their own way. And his line that he wrote was that power is a hard thing to have to give up, and it's harder if you never even had it in the first place. And either way, you will be called to answer for all the collateral damage that you've left in your wake.
Yeah,
that's good. I think I agree with that. I'm gonna go check that out. I hadn't seen his review, but I'm gonna go check that out.
Do it up.
Yeah, I would. I'd also give it 4 out of 5. Just for everything that you guys have said. I usually lean towards more like character studies a little bit, but I guess we haven't discussed a lot of blaxploitation on the show, but the ones we have that I specifically remember is Black Caesar and Truck Turner, and just having them be the focus of the story always helps me just attach myself to the story itself. But as this film was going, I could just see how these systems at play were going to basically destroy everybody in its path, and it's just it's a pretty nihilistic film, all things considered. I did find myself a little bit taken aback by it at first, but that definitive moment at the end when Quinn is shot in the head and they just freeze frame, and that's what you're left with. It just made me realize what this film was kind of saying about the systems at play, the racial tensions that were especially happening in the 70s, and it's a very bleak film, but I think it's worth going through because it's sadly accurate. I guess would be the way to put it. So yeah, 4 out of 5. Really enjoyed it.
For you, Nick?
Yeah, I think 4 out of 5. It's a favorite of mine for entertainment value, for as dark as it is, and I also, again, I encourage anyone to watch it just to really get a sense of like the time and place. It's funny, you see something like The Deuce that spends all this money trying to recreate New York in the 70s, and that's why I feel so lucky that we have movies like this where, well, they actually were there. So yeah, I love that. I love the textures of this movie. I also I'm a man who, like, in organized crime movies and crime movies, just all you need, right, is like a heist of a moderate sum of money, and I'm in. So I love this movie. I hope this gets more people to check it out, and I think it was probably a big influence on a lot of other movies people love, and people might not realize that as well. So yeah. Check it out, guys. It's a thrill ride, to say the least. Though don't expect any happy endings.
Yeah, it's a very sad film.
Yep.
As is our next film, which is another reason why I thought they would pair so well. Because this is a very sad life, which I think is why it's so fertile for movies.
Hell yeah. Well, I think that'll wrap it up for Across 110th Street. There, we are going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about Donnie Brasco.
It's your best friend that does it.
You've got to pull him out. You think I'm a rat?
How many times I have you into my own house? If you're a rat, then I'm the biggest mutt in the history of the mafia.
If I come out, Lefty dies. They're gonna kill him. Because he vouched for me. Because he stood up for me. That's the same thing as if I put a bullet in his head myself. Do you understand?
Who am I? I'm a spoke on the wheel. And so are you. Hey, Don.
Yeah.
Let's take a walk. I'm your best friend.
All right, we are back, and we are talking Donnie Brasco, the 1997 American crime drama film directed by Mike Newell, starring Al Pacino, Johnny Depp, Michael Madsen, Bruno Kirby, pretty all-star cast.
Paul Giamatti, Tim Blake Nelson for one of my favorite scenes.
for just like one-off scenes.
So good. So, forget about it.
Forget about it.
Yeah, it's a great scene.
And written by Paul Atanasio, based on the book, obviously, from 1988. Directed or written by, obviously, the guy who the story's about, Joseph D. Pistone.
Joe Pistone. Hey,
Joe
how are
Pistone.
you? Yeah, who actually has his own podcast now, which is not bad. Yeah.
Is he not still in hiding? What's he doing?
Is he okay? Yeah, is he all right? Thought he had that 500.
Listen, the mob isn't hitting anyone right now. There's actually a really good podcast. Is NBA and the Button Man, a guy who was made in the Lucchese family in 2013 and then flipped in 2018. Just has a podcast now where he talks about the mob. It's insane. I've posted about it on Twitter, but it's like it's riveting stuff.
It's like,
and
I feel like our generation
the real deal.
Is the only like who else would be able to get away with that? They couldn't go on the radio in the 80s and just be like, "Hey, I was a mafia guy. Let's do this." They'd easily get whacked.
No, it's it's only because at this point the mob like really doesn't want to do any sort of like they don't want any heat whatsoever. So
right? Yeah, too many movies.
These guys
on
aren't
them.
too worried. Though he is still like, also too. This guy didn't accept like witness protection or anything. I think he just moved. Okay. Though he didn't do a very good job because I'm pretty sure he moved to Georgia because I think he just like said that by accident on the podcast once. But again, I don't think anyone's gonna hit this dude. It's just like it wouldn't be worth it. But the podcast is phenomenal. Not to pimp like somebody else's podcast on yours, but trust me, they don't exactly. It's not crossover.
No,
No problem at all.
They aren't going to be taken.
I mean, it sounds pretty interesting to have this guy's perspective on things.
But yeah, so anyway,
I was going to say that's probably connected to part of the appeal for you, Nick, right? Which is that this is a mob film that is adapted from a book written by a guy who actually did do the undercover work and actually was part of the mob for many months and years. So I'm assuming that's what it intrigues you.
Exactly. It's also important to put into context a couple things about this movie too, and about what really happened. And one is that this movie is it's never explicitly said, but in real life. So this movie's about centers around members of the Bonanno crime family, and a strong presence and alliance of the Bonanno crime family was in Canada for a long, long time, and was run by the Rizzutos, which were known, and they were all around Montreal, and they were at one point known as the Sixth Family. But so anyway, I only mention that because in real life, famously, 2 Canadian members of the family came down and participated in the 3 captains' murder.
Right, and it was Jamie and I.
In the movie, yeah, that's right. When I need hitters from Canada, I call you boys down. But the other important context is Joe Pistone infiltrated the Bonanno crime family at a time where they themselves had great internal upheaval, and we see that as well in the movie with the boss, who again isn't named specifically in the movie. Is supposed to be Carmine Galante. Was killed in sort of a civil war type thing, and that's what we see in this movie, where it's Sonny Black, which is the crew that Donnie Brasco was a part of, was aligned with one member of the family named Phil Rastelli, who was in jail at the time, but he led one faction, and then the other faction of the family was led by the 3 captains, the Sonny Red, Big Phil Lucky, and Big Trin, who we see in the movie, and they were sort of vying for control of the family. So not only was Pistone undercover, but he was undercover at one of the most infamous moments and present for one of the most infamous moments in mob history.
Wow.
So that's important. The other important context that I don't know like how much I need to stress for your listeners, but Joe Pistone, as Donnie Brasco, was going to become a made member of the Bonanno crime family. He was going to be inducted. The FBI decided that they couldn't legally allow that to happen. And that's why that didn't happen. But I don't know, like, I can't stress to you how, and the listeners, how insane that is. That he was going to be a inducted member of the mafia. That is.
Was it just unheard of to get that far? Is that essentially?
It was so hard to become inducted, period. And then on top of that was, at this period of time, the books, as they were known, have been closed permanently for like 25 years. They were closed by the commission. So certain families didn't necessarily follow this all the time, but theoretically, new guys were made for 25 years. So there's famous mobsters who were just like toiling away as associates for 25 over some people over 25 years. I mean, so
like the Pacino character in the film.
Exactly.
Right, I was just gonna say, that's where you see
Lefty
him,
guns.
and he's still like just in a kind of small apartment and just watching hyena tapes all day and having no money and so that
was
what personally really worked.
Was a famous brokester is what they call them in the mob, which is these made guys who never have any money. And so that's like, again, that's what's so interesting to me, right, is those guys. Is we are not talking about the Corleones. Right?
Yeah.
We're talking about Lefty Guns over in his dump apartment in Williamsburg. Right. And but you know what? It's like Goodfellas, right? What does he say to Donnie? the first thing when they first meet, my mother can hold her head high in any of the 5 boroughs, right?
Yeah.
And so
I can't hear that anymore and not think of Travolta.
Right, which is too bad that he ruined that, because that is a great line from
5 boroughs
from Pacino. But the point being, right, is like that's why it's worth it for this guy. This guy, his entire life has been a waste, right? All he does is complain the whole movie about how he's been passed over and he has no money. But this notion of being a part of this secret society, right? So great to him that it's worth it for that, right? It's Henry Hill saying it was all worth it because the neighborhood kids carried my mother's groceries home. It's
right.
It's almost for people like us, for just normal people, it's an almost unknowable mindset. And also too, that's why it's so great to see this Pacino, right? Of course, we associate with Michael Corleone, now in his tracksuit making Coco Van. With his punch of salt.
I loved all the scenes of him in his like crummy little apartment in his tracksuit, just opening it up and getting the cigarettes going and watching his nature documentaries and just having a great time. Well, and two, he's been through the ringer, man. Like his kid's an addict. I think he at one point says that he has penis cancer, which I did not know was a thing actually until this film. I don't know if that's. I don't know.
He
if he
also Lefty Guns in real life owed like over $100,000 to a capo in the Bonanno crime family, and so that debt was so bad that actually kept him from being an inducted member until he managed to pay that debt off somehow.
Damn.
So this was so the whole stuff, the constant bits in this movie of him just like asking Donnie for like all the money on him essentially at any given time is very true to life. Like that is what Lefty Guns was like, apparently.
I love that callback they do later on, more close to the end of their relationship, where he's just like, I did this for you, I did that for you. If I had money, did I give it to you? Well, no, but I would have.
Yes, it's one of my favorite lines. I love
it.
this movie because it's so quotable. I mean, I feel I quote this movie so often, so many good lines.
Performances are top notch, and honestly, I think the script is as well. For me, that kind of brings it back a little bit is Newell's directing, which I don't think is I think his best movie that I've seen. I just think that there's certain there's a little bit of flair that he's lacking, I find, and I think he's at certain points. I think he should have gone a little further with the violence, but that could be just me being a sicko on the Sleazoids show. I don't know, but I will say performances and writing I think are top notch in this movie.
I think that this is a really, really well done script, and obviously when you have characters like Pacino reading a good script, you're going to get magic on screen.
Insanely
right.
accurate.
Yes, that
with the politics and all that, yeah.
That too, and even on some level, I can forgive some of the, some of the kind of flat direction of Newell, or maybe not even flat, maybe just a little generic, I guess. Like I found some of it,
it's not bad.
Just where there were scenes that, just played a little bit into, despite the fact that it's so real, every so often it would play into, kind of just a dramatic cliche with really, I thought there was a strange score to it at certain moments that was just very obvious and over dramatic strings to it, really kind of telling you how you're supposed to feel, landing very obvious, just emotional beats that the characters say out loud. And I was just a little bit surprised to find that in a film that otherwise, I think, as Nick has been pointing out, is very, true to the situation, and then sometimes would just get, a little hyper dramatic for me at certain points. I honestly kind of wished that they fully committed to the flatness of it, because I did like how that kind of captured, because I was going to be willing, I think, to forgive that this didn't have the panache or the style of a Scorsese gangster movie, because that's not what it's trying to be. This is a movie that's hanging out with lower tier gangsters who haven't got much out of
guys
being
who are
in the family.
literally stealing quarters out of parking meters, which was
Exactly. What a
apparently
great
something
moment.
that these dipshits did at the time.
And what does he say? He says, "A score's a score."
Yeah, score's a score. Yeah, and I love that too. And that was literally apparently how it was in these social clubs. Just every day, guys coming in being like, "I have a truckload of razor blades." Just like, cool. What are we supposed to do with that? Like, I got a rack of suits, you know, and Madsen does a great job as Sonny Black, and he, all that stuff with him where he's just like, what do I have? I have you schmucks, and we're in this bar in Williamsburg, and then you have Sonny Red, who's making millions, and that's very accurate to the mob too, where it is this great, it's a wide band, right? There is no salary in the mob. There is no 401k, right? Is you eat what you kill. And so you have guys who ostensibly, right, so Sonny Black gets bumped up to a captain, and he's in charge of the crew. You've guys ostensibly on the same level, and yet some guys are making millions and some guys are making nothing. And that's sort of another sort of interesting discrepancy that has always fascinated me about this subculture.
Yeah, I know. I really enjoy the overall kind of structure to this, where you're following Johnny Depp, who is playing Joe Pistone, who is pretending to be Donnie Brasco, who is trying to get close to Lefty in order to.
He's a guy playing a guy disguised as another guy. Always love that.
That's right. But I will say I thought there was like an interesting lack of that kind of feeling that you get of that like paranoia of being undercover. I was surprised that it didn't quite go to that realm like of Leonardo DiCaprio in The Departed is something I think of,
sure,
where he gets kind of like in intense, and he gets kind of I think about the scene where he is like forced to kill someone with who's that British actor who's there?
Oh, Ray Winstone.
Ray Winstone. And how in my opinion, in that film, you just really feel his transformation into doing the mundane daily work of being a mobster, to the point where he's he gets into that kind of like that he can't distinguish himself from that. And I see in the material that this is going for. And for some reason, it just, when it got back to Johnny Depp doing the shrill wife domestic stuff,
it's the weakest part of the movie. I hate that. It's funny. This movie, I'm so insane that I quite frankly, like, I edit this movie in real time in my head as I watch it. I truly think I do, because I agree with you about like the flatness of the direction and certain musical cues, but I swear to you, like, I rewatched it earlier today, I didn't see any of that. You know what I mean? Like, I just only
know exactly
focused
what you mean. I definitely
on the stuff
have movies like that
I like so much. It's all I see, right, is the scene when they're walking up to the social club for the first time, and Al Pacino's explaining to him the difference between a friend of mine and a friend of ours, and it's so good, because that's my favorite type of screenwriting, right? Is like, so much of this of organized crime has to do with language and what's said and what's not said and what's left unsaid, and how oftentimes these guys are saying one thing and meaning another thing. And so often I take issue with movies about organized crime where the characters they just say what they're going to do. You know what I mean? There's no sense of accuracy to this language. And I think this movie does justice to capturing that sort of like how knockaround guys talk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think especially, I think this is a very, very well written film. And I think too that I ended up reading that, they were able to get so much of that language you're talking about, right? Because they were literally given access to tapes of them speaking.
Yes. Yep.
Oh, right.
So like they were literally able to, like, so on a writing level, this is exactly how all of these people would have talked, essentially in real life. Which is obviously a very cool thing to just, have in the world out there, to just know that is how, these people kind of talk to each other. And you do get some like wonderful, like intimate moments between some of these characters. I mean, I think Pacino, he's done special work in basically everything he's been in, but like there is some really good lines that he gets in this, and great moments that are just, so kind of pitiable, but at the same time endearing. Like, I find him very charming, but at the same time, like, you know, you do kind of just feel bad for him in a way that makes him look pathetic. Like, I think about that scene where they're in the motel in Florida, and he thinks that
his card to Santo Trifficante Jr., he was going to give the fucking card to a boss. It's so funny. It's just, what were you thinking, dude? Come on.
And I think about how he doesn't like to be cold, and he freaks out when Donnie like opens down the
draft.
You're
gonna kill me with that fucking draft.
The window
Donnie.
for the draft, yeah. But in the motel, he thinks that Donnie has fucked with the air conditioner because he's so cold in the motel, and he's just like, and you know, Donnie's like, you know, someone else is probably, you know, this is probably Sonny Black's sense of humor because you were teasing him about his shirt earlier or whatever. You know, this is, you know, someone did this to you, and he was like, I think you did this to me, you little cocksucker or whatever. And then he's like, you don't call me a cocksucker, you cocksucker. And they start going back and forth, and it's such like this pathetic thing where they're clearly fighting about something else, and they are fighting about
but they won't
the
say
fact
it.
that they're fighting about the fact that Lefty thinks that Donnie is, you know, going to leave his mentorship and go, you know, into business with Sonny Black instead of him, who Michael Madsen, who is a little bit higher tier, a little bit, you know, more, you know, a little bit more cool conventionally. You know, he doesn't, we don't get to see him lounging in his tracksuit.
Very capable guy.
Yeah,
very serious, capable guy, and someone who, as he says to Donnie, is able to actually help him ascend the crime family.
Yes.
You know, unlike Lefty, who is sort of a dead end. And I think Lefty knows it, and then the side of Donnie that's actually Donnie Brasco now knows it too, right? It's and I agree with you, Josh, too, that it's the they never hit that paranoia thing, but I think they do a fairly interesting job and good job of sort of getting across how he does become this guy, right?
Yeah.
He totally loses himself.
He definitely starts talking like them and being able to pick up on their language. I think that's the most important part, is the way that he learns to interact with them. Because when he first meets up with Pacino, he's teaching him all the rules. And he's just like, you know, you got to get rid of that mustache. You got to, you know...
Which is a real thing, by the way. That's true. No mustache is an organized crime.
New pants.
You also can't have a 5 o'clock shadow on the NBA and the Buttman podcast. He talks about one time how he had a 5 o'clock shadow when he met his captain, and the dude like dressed him down for it. It was like, you shave your face when you come meet me. And that was in like 2017, by the way.
Yeah, and so he teaches them the ropes of being a wise guy and carrying his money in a roll, not a wallet, and not wearing jeans and all of this. Yeah, and I love that, you know, they sort of bring up that, you know, they have regulations in the same way that the FBI has regulations for him, because there's a really hilarious joke where the FBI asks him to shave his mustache, and he's like, I'm going to do it anyway because the mob asked me to shave my mustache, which I thought was really funny. But over the course of the film, you can definitely see him pick up the language and being able to talk, you know, about what Nick was talking about, how a lot of the time they would say one thing, but they're really talking about something else. There's a coded kind of language that they have, and I really liked the scene where they're fighting with each other, and they're getting progressively angrier at each other for calling each other a cocksucker, which is like probably the 15th worst thing that anyone calls someone in this film. And like they definitely, you know, they don't give a shit about that at all. They have very vulgar language overall, I would say, but it's so funny.
Yeah, and Donnie also too was undercover for years. Too.
Yeah, I read that he didn't see his own family for 2 years, which is actually where the film becomes a little, you know, they keep trying to like connect the family back into it, like he's going home every day, but it sounds like the real Pistone did not go home. For a very long time
for sure. I mean, seriously, like I can't stress this enough. This dude was gonna get made. If you do the math on like, all right, there's how many Italians in New York City? Couple million. There's how many Italians are involved in organized crime? 10,000? Less, probably. How many of those are actually made? A couple hundred. So we're talking like, in a weird way, again, I'm not condoning it, but like, it's harder to get in. like you have a better shot at being accepted to Harvard, Yale, and Stanford in the same year than you do of ever being inducted into the mafia. So that shows you, that says like this was a guy who lived and breathed it.
Yep.
And you know, it's stunning that this happened.
Well, yeah,
and
what I love about that is that it sounds like obviously like this is a very prestigious thing, and then the movie makes room for such pathetic moments where he's like, "Are you gonna kill me over a fucking draft? Like, what the fuck are you talking about?" And you just watch Pacino like wrestling through his handbag. You're like, what the fuck is he going for? And then he like it takes him a full minute to pull a switchblade out of his bag.
It's Pacino is like the king of bits in this movie too. Like every scene, he's pulling some type of bit.
Yeah, that's like a physical comedy gag. Him trying to pull that switchblade out of his bag, and then he's in his big blanket running through the Florida, like outside. He locks himself outside. He's screaming about how wise guys don't work on Mother's Day. Things like that. So I really liked how the movie did make room for like what seems like these very realistic and kind of, you know, not necessarily even, you know, eventually it's sad, but it is just kind of like pathetic detail.
Right. Exactly.
Or even
which I think is great.
The very frightening politics that Donnie ends up realizing as well. I mean, he always knew that this was going to be very just violent and horrible. But that scene where he's forced to cut apart all of the leaders that
the three capos.
They just destroy the bodies, and at one point it shows that Lefty just takes out that one other henchman that they've been friends with for he mentions that they've been friends for like 20 years.
Nikki. And apparently they wanted Pesci to play that character, which would have been a bit much, probably.
Yeah, probably. But then Donnie realizes that it's like, if you can shoot this guy that you've known for 25 years just based on an order, then where the fuck does that lead me? You know, like it's just that was a really
spokes on
cool
a wheel is
shot.
what it says.
Yeah, I think they do a good job of really getting that across. That the only people in that life who are going to whack you out are your best friends. It's the only way you're going to get hit is someone you've known for 20 years. That's just how it is. And also that one day they just call for you and you got to go. Right.
I think Pacino says something like, it's like in the army, it doesn't matter. You're killing people you don't know. You're going to be killing your friends in this line of business. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he says.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's also what leads to kind of like a more comedic version earlier in the film where he gets called in, and it's getting called in for Michael Madsen playing Sonny Black to say that, you know, he's been promoted now that the boss has been whacked, and there's been a rub out, they say in the paper, and he gives him the gift of a lion. Which comes up multiple.
So useless. I love it.
Which comes up multiple times where they're taking the lion for the walk, like down the street.
I love like Al Pacino's like 30 years and for what? A lion? Like he's like, what the fuck am I gonna do with a lion? And then you have amazing shots of them feeding it in the parking lot of the back.
Yeah, all the hamburgers. It's great.
Such a crazy detail. And what's even funnier about that moment is he goes, "That's why you sent for me," and he's like, "What? You thought you were gonna get whacked?"
Yeah,
because he was partially prepared for that, and he even tells Donnie. He
was super prepared. He was like, he thought he was going.
Yeah.
So it's it's great, and they're just goofing on him, right? And
but I love Donnie too, who's just like, come on, man, like, so what? They gave you a line. It's better than getting whacked. You thought you were gonna get whacked, and he's so mad.
Yeah, look on the bright side. Yeah, he's like, you thought you were getting clipped 20 minutes ago,
and he's like, I did not think that. Did I say that? He's like, did I say that I was gonna get whacked? And he was like, well, not in certain words, but you know.
Yeah, how many words does it take, Donnie? How many? Yeah, I say that all the time. Well, how many words does it take?
And he's like, you know, Sonny probably only got moved up because he was probably in on whacking the boss. And then and he's just like, another thing that I get passed over for, whacking the boss.
Yeah, his perspective on things is just so like confused after so many decades in this I guess business. It's wild. I also like the way that they portray Donnie having to do some pretty horrific things. I mean, we mentioned the body delimbing everybody, but there's also the Japanese restaurant scene where he just gets the owner of the restaurant completely beaten up to a pulp in the bathroom just because he can't get caught. So there's a lot of
my
that.
favorite detail about this scene is that he just immediately puts all of his chips on racism.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And it
works.
He
knows it'll work. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if I didn't say this, in a bizarre case of life imitating movie, in like last year, a Bonanno soldier, so same crime family, ended up becoming a federal informant because he engaged in a drunken, unprovoked attack in a sushi restaurant where he blinded the owner of this sushi restaurant for some reason.
Damn.
And rather than spend 8 years in jail on assault, he became a cooperating witness. However, his mob nickname was PDBS, and the juries felt the same, and literally every major trial he's been used as a witness in, including last year the trial of the acting boss and consigliere of the Bonanno crime family were both found not guilty because the jury felt he was such like a despicable person. So anyway, that's like such an unnecessary tangent, but I always laugh. I'm like, what a weird like full circle life imitating art, imitating whatever. So.
You also get with Donnie in that scene. At first, he's like trying to stop them because they go pretty far, and then the moment that the owner just kind of pushes him away, he just starts beating him again, even more.
Right.
And then cut to him listening to the tape, almost like he's putting himself through something torturous. Like he's like, it's like, remember what I did, or he's trying to become numb to it. It's not entirely clear, but I like the kind of gray area there.
Well, the thing too, the rule too, and Pistone has talked about this before, is when you're undercover in the FBI, like technically you're not allowed to engage in any crimes of violence, and that includes assaulting a Japanese guy in his restaurant. Who was
just asking you to take your shoes off in his restaurant.
However,
and the only reason you didn't take your shoes off was because you have a wiretap in your shoes.
Right, and it's like, however, as Pistone said, like, it is a gray area because the number one rule that supersedes everything is don't blow your cover and get killed. So, when that's why Pistone also is such a wild card, right? Is he was undercover for years. Like, he was gonna get made again. Like, the amount of shit that guy had to have done for the mob is like, I'm sure we don't even know the full extent of it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we know that he helped chop up some bodies. That's for sure.
Yeah,
in
he
very
included
gruesome
that.
detail.
So could only be worse that he didn't include.
Yeah, that scene was surprising to me because the movie was surprisingly like very like not particularly
so interesting enough,
violent
he wasn't
until that moment.
in real life. He wasn't actually present for that. They changed that for the movie.
Okay, so they wanted to
that.
Emphasize that.
He heard about it later. However, because it was such a like monumental event, they wanted to include it because it changed everything within the crime family while he was in it.
Okay.
But we do know everything that happened in the actual murder because Joe Massino, the former boss of the Bonanno crime family, became an informant in the early 2000s and was the first mob boss ever to do that. So if you have some time on your hands, people go pull some court transcripts and read some pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, it sounds amazing, honestly.
There's a good book too. I think it's called The Last God. I'll shout out a couple book recs at the end. Actually, I'll save that for the end. But I'll give the reader some book recommendation.
Sounds good. I really like too that it's an extension of kind of how this whole thing is about how these are kind of lower tier mobsters trying to make their way up. But I really like how like the big plan in this film is just to open up a club in Florida.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? It's like that's the big move.
It's the dream.
and he's like throwing a yacht party to convince the Florida boss to like allow him to stay there year round so he can open up his club and everything. But then Sonny Black hijacks his thing, and as Nick mentioned earlier, like Lefty was planning on just giving the boss like a card, like a greetings card that he found with Donnie that just had some wordplay about the term friend from one friend to another, and he was just like, this is brilliant. The bosses love this kind of shit. If I give this to him, maybe I'll be his friend.
Right,
he'll
of
let
course,
me
too,
stay in
this
Florida.
movie takes place in the same universe as American Hustle, because they're on the ab scam boat.
Oh yeah.
Which
is important.
which is kind of like the only time the jig is almost up on Donnie is when Lefty sees like the boat had been used in this FBI sting.
Yeah,
But
and then
so-
he switches it on him. He says it's like we outsmarted them, and tries and convinces Lefty to, kind of be like, you did a good thing by outsmarting them while you were on there, so don't worry. I do him having to constantly come up with ways to get out of those situations. It is really good writing.
I always love the scene in the airport when the prosecutor recognizes Pistone,
yeah.
and he has to just punch him. Just has
He's
to drop
like,
him.
you tried to grab my cock. I don't know what to tell you.
His excuses are
Such
always
a
so
good
funny,
excuse,
right?
yeah. Tried to grab
They
my
killed my old
cock.
man in Okinawa, and he tried to grab my cock. Two absolutely flawless
That's so good.
excuses in 1980.
He's like, forget about it.
Forget about it. He tried to grab my
fucking
cock.
forget about it. That's right.
So good, yeah.
Yeah, and he almost does get caught by Lefty, who does find out that boat was being used by the FBI, and he it was part of Donnie's plan was that he could get him a boat, and it was kind of his idea. That happens in that scene right with Paul Giamatti and Tim Blake Nelson, where they show up and they're kind of just I know why they're Nick's favorite characters, because they're guys who are listening in and they're just like, man, this stuff's kind of cool, eh? Like they just say
To
certain
me,
words.
It's the viewer, right? It's like I am just Giamatti and Blake Nelson, right? Exactly. I'm sitting there with my Budweiser, my Bud Heavy, just listening to court transcripts. So
Yes.
Talking about all the different ways you can say "forget about it."
exactly.
I love
and it's
that
great,
scene.
and it's exactly what we talked about. It's all language, right? One
Right,
word
right.
means everything to those guys.
Yeah, and I love how it like
and they were like, explain that. What is that? And he's like, well, it's this and it's that, and it's like it has like 5 different meanings. And he's like, sometimes it just means forget about it.
Yeah, and
Right.
he says it with such a sentimentality, like he's really growing closer to this kind of language and lifestyle in a way. Like when he says the line, sometimes it just means forget about it. There's almost like a pride in his tone
Yes.
a little bit, and I really like that part.
Yeah, see, this is what was interesting to me, is I could kind of tell through the writing, because it was just it was pretty well done, that he was starting to become more like them. But then they always have to. I found some of it, they just felt like they really had to underline some stuff. Like then they have a scene where his wife literally screams at him, "You act like one of them now," and he like
Right.
smacks
Yeah,
her.
So
And I was-
heavy-handed. Yeah.
And I was just like, yeah, I don't know that that's necessary. Like I feel like you guys were. I feel like they just lost a little bit of confidence in some of the
I'm
writing.
also pretty
and the
sure that didn't
performances.
happen, and Joe Pistone was probably like, "Oh, cool.
Now
so
I
I like
smacked
hit
my
my
wife."
wife now." Yeah, great.
I did like the one part they did with the family where he returns and then he instantly gets a call after he has a conversation about his wife not doing this as much anymore, and he just gets a cool little shot of him looking at his family having dinner and then just goes away. That was kind of the subtlety I was more so looking for with the family stuff.
Yep.
But that I did like. I liked that shot.
Yeah, well, and the one family scene that I actually latched onto too was the one where he calls from Florida and he's asking about his daughter's upcoming communion, and you can just see both Madsen and Pacino like staring him down at Florida, being like, "Who the fuck is he on the phone with?" and shit like that, and he's just talking about like, the kids are going out to school, I'm taking them out. That kind of stuff, while he's just like living it up in Florida as a mobster.
Yeah, I
So
like
some of the places where they nailed the contradiction, I think, worked, but they did fall back on those scenes a lot as like a crutch to get to
the tension a little bit.
To try and really emphasize what I feel like was kind of either already in the material or stuff that Newell just wasn't as successfully dramatizing as he could have, because by the end of the film I could see absolutely what it was going for, because it does end up with the situation where he is being confronted by Lefty, who's like, why did you tell us you had a boat and the boat was an FBI boat? Like, what the fuck was that? And, he ends up talking his way out of that, being like, you think that I knew about that? Like, I got it from another guy. He must have been, the guy. And plus, we got away scot-free. So clearly the FBI investigation, nothing came of it. So, we're fine. Whatever. Mm-hmm. But, he ends up being asked to murder, is it Sonny Red's son, as revenge for fucking up with their club.
Yeah, who's currently Whack Whack, Bruno and Delicato, who's currently serving a 20-year sentence for engaging in a hit in 2002. I think he gets out in 2026. We'll have to have him on.
Yes.
I'll come back on. We'll get him
We'll have to
on.
ask him.
Yeah, we can
That'd be
talk
pretty
to him.
legendary, I will say.
He's I'll put it this much. He's remained true to himself. I don't see him coming on any podcasts, but one can dream.
Absolutely.
But it's interesting because this is where they stop him. The FBI stops him from doing that because he's going to literally go commit a murder, which is kind of what you were saying, is that they, if he was going to be made and they knew that, and he was going to have to do some sort of, murder in order to do it, they would, put an end to it there. So that's where they kind of stop him. From,
he wanted to do the full, as we call it in the biz, he wanted to go full Vigo in Eastern Promises. He wanted to be like, I'm the captain now.
Yes. And one thing that I thought was interesting at this point was that they go in and they ask, and they literally go, yeah, see this guy right here? He was an FBI agent the whole time. And here's pictures of him. Here's him being a part of the FBI. Anyway, here's all the evidence. We're not arresting any of you. Have a great day. And they I guess rightfully assume that it's like a psychological tactic against them, but I remember thinking there's no way that they do that. Like, they have to protect the cover or protect
you know what, though? In this instance, it did actually happen.
That's
how is that protocol, though? Like, that's insane.
Did they get in shit for it in some way?
It was more so them coming in to say, this is the situation. He was in the FBI. You can believe it or not, but if anything happens to him, we're coming down.
Gotcha. Okay.
Hard.
Okay.
And that happened a few times in history. There was essentially like there was one time for instance, where like John Gotti was picked up on tape saying, well, maybe we should kill this DEA agent, and the DEA came to Gotti's house and they were like, if you ever hurt a federal agent, like, the army will be here. Like, don't be an idiot. So it was more so. It was the movie. It comes across more as like a gloating thing, but in real life, it was more so just like, don't get any idea. Didn't stop the mob though. They did, in fact, as the end title card say, put an open contract on his head.
Oh man, it's crazy how like. You do feel a little bit of like sympathy even for Lefty, because he has that line before where he's like where he really confronts Donnie in the car, and he basically is just like, if you are a FBI informant, I have to be the worst mafia guy there ever was, like the dumbest. And so when he realizes everything,
it's so sad.
Watching him on the corner just like looking out on the street, I did feel like some sadness. Like, this guy is just, he's been he's been tricked, and now he knows that he's going to be
They were the laughing stock of the mob. Like, this incident got them kicked off the commission. I mean, they were like demoted essentially, but they were put on a pay no mind list, more or less. And what's funny though is, and the movie changes it for cinematic reasons that I totally like, which is they imply, right, that Pacino got whacked out.
Yeah, with the gunshot. Yeah.
Yeah, but in real life, actually what happened is the first guy to introduce Brasco to anyone was this guy named Tony Mira, and he got clipped. It was Sonny Black is the one who got called 18 days after Donnie Brasco was pulled from his undercover assignment, and he went willingly and knew he was going to get hit, and in very theatrical fashion. They shot him in the back of the head and then cut his hands off.
Damn.
Because he
he just accepted it.
Yeah, he
Wow.
was. Yeah, he was one of those guys who sort of just believed in it to the end, and
Right.
he knew what he was walking into, I guess. And then Lefty, actually, the FBI picked him up before the mob could kill him.
Oh.
But Lefty refused to roll. He was like,
Ah.
I believe in this thing. And he did his time. And I guess the mob respected that he just kept his mouth shut, that he was left alive, and he actually got out of prison and
Wow.
lived with his family for a few years before passing away. And nothing ever happened to him.
That's crazy. Wow.
So-
I mean, I do like the
Damn.
change they make for the movie.
But
I
the
think-
ending's great.
Yeah,
Yes,
the implications
the change
are
is
a lot
fantastic.
better.
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Well, because I mean, the
But-
way that he goes, tell Donnie if he calls that if it was anyone, I'm glad it was him, and you can see him slowly taking, his watch and his valuables off because he knows that this time for real, he's walking out to his whacking.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
the-
when he goes back to
Ugh.
leave, like the couple pieces, I get a lump in my throat every time. It's brutal.
And him sadly watching like hyenas tear apart an animal right before
Yeah.
too. Like, oh my god. Yeah.
Although I do find it funny because I like the moment where he closes the door and then you get the gunshot and then you get the cut to Johnny taking practice shots. But I thought it was super funny. I read that the only reason this bit about Johnny taking practice shots at the FBI, the only reason this was included in the movie was because the studio said we wanted a shot of him shooting a gun for the trailer.
Right.
And so they were like,
It ended up
okay,
working out.
I guess we'll shoot that and put it in the most like emotionally dramatic.
yeah,
part of
like
the movie.
they found a spot, that's for sure. Holy shit.
Yeah, well, and this kind of gets to my point is that, I was kind of building to that. I think, like, overall, I can see exactly what it's going for in the writing, and I think in the performances, I get stuff out of it. Like, I
think they're great.
I like that moment of Pacino with his valuables, but when we get to this next moment, which is of, Johnny Depp, Pistone, getting handed his medal and his $500 check
So brutal, so insulting.
yeah, for all the all the work that he's done. For some reason that genuine friendship angle of it, and I think what you're supposed to be experiencing there is the realization that he's sold out and killed a genuine friend for like $500 and
Right.
like a medal that like means nothing to him. And I would just say that I'm not sure if it's just a personal thing. It doesn't quite have that impact on me that like that existential despair that I feel when I watch like The Irishman do something similar. When I
Right.
watch De Niro, whack Pacino in that film, and you're just left to sit with 50 more minutes of how empty his life is now without that person in his life. And I don't know what it is. I'm not sure if it's the Depp performance. That's just because
really good, but
I think he's good, but for some reason, like I feel like the friendship angle on it is really like. I feel more of that charm from the Pacino character. Like I feel more of the friendship coming more from his side. I guess partially because he knows he's got to keep this guy a little bit at bay, but then he's got genuine feelings for him a little bit in there too. And yeah, for some reason I just don't quite feel that thing between them from Depp's perspective as much as I do from Pacino's perspective. Like him putting those valuables away and going away, I think is like a genuinely really impactful moment. And for some reason, the next scene didn't hit me as hard, and I was kind of weirded out by that.
Yeah, I don't think I do agree that I think that Pacino's overall arc is more impactful than Depp just kind of like looking into out the window. And
I mean, he has the
so
unfortunate
passive,
thing of
too.
the last shot
He's
being him
passive.
looking at
Yeah.
the family too.
yeah. I just think that some of the direction is a little bit flat, but I will say I think the performances and the writing make this a
Are good,
very,
for
very
sure.
entertaining film. But I do struggle with it still. Like if we're getting to the reductive rating.
Yeah,
round.
we should pivot to reductive rating round here for sure. And yeah, I kind of struggle with it too. I mean, I think for now, I'm gonna go with the highest 3 I could possibly give.
That's where I think I'm at, but yeah.
Because it's really close, and I don't really know what's struggling. It really just is. I don't feel the end of it the same way that I kind of hoped I would in the material, because I see it there.
Yes.
I see it in the material, and I'm like, okay, I get exactly what I should be feeling. And for some reason, there's just something in the way that Newell approaches it that doesn't quite hit it for me, even though, some of his, reasoning behind not being as, stylish and, having such flared filmmaking serves the material. It serves how, these guys are more low-key, are having more sad lives. Like, listening to Pacino talk about, how his kid's an addict and he's got cancer and he lives in the same building that his ex-wife lives in, that he sees in the elevator. And, like, normally you're used to seeing a character like this, and he's living in the Henry Hill mansion.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a very different thing that it's going for. So I don't totally blame the approach, but I do think that, there is a little bit of that kind of very cliche, over dramatic kind of Oscar biopic kind of sensibilities that it sometimes leans into in some of the subplots, especially just in some of the,
I would think, but still there.
Less than you would expect, for sure, because I think almost anything with Pacino in it is so well handled in the writing that it almost doesn't matter.
Yeah.
For me, it's just when it gets to Depp being alone or Depp being with his family. Which is, I did watch the extended cut, so maybe that's also more. It happens
yeah, there's
more
definitely
in that film
more
too.
family in that cut.
Okay, so maybe I
Yeah.
got to just give the theatrical a shot too, and that might be what's hurting it for me, just because it is 2.5 hours.
Oh,
and there's
okay.
so
I watched
I
much
rewatched
of
the
it.
theatrical. Yeah.
Oh, okay, because there was so much of
That would
the
drag
Depp
it down, I
family
feel
stuff.
like. Yeah.
That yeah.
Because I don't think Anne Hatch gives a particularly good performance either.
Yeah, it's
I
like
mean, she
so-
doesn't have the best material, to be fair, but well, the
Right.
point being is, we want to spend time with the guys. That's why we're watching the movie, right? Is like, and that's what, and I will say though, it does a good job of being like, you in a sense feel that internal struggle of Pistone coming to terms with he does want to be with his other family.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
him
Yeah.
having to come to, and that's almost what she says to him, like, at least be honest with yourself, right? Don't keep blaming the work.
Yeah.
You're happy to do it.
You're
so,
embracing this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would. I think right now I would give it like Josh said, the highest possible 3 I could give. But I have found myself. This is my second time watching it, and I liked it more this time. And I find myself still kind of having the urge to go back to it maybe in a year or so. So, it could get the upgrade. I just
I do like how kind of low key and unglamorous depiction of this kind of stuff it is. I just do think that, the guy who is most known for like 4 Weddings and a Funeral and Prince of Persia doesn't quite have the skill to take this material to that that 5-star level. I think that it honestly could be.
Yeah.
Based on the material, like based on everything Nick's told us about it, and how accurate it is, and what they've done to it in the screenwriting, and I think they did a really, really good job. And they just kind of, they just probably needed a little bit more of an accomplished director to take it to the next level for me. But beyond that, very, very solid stuff.
Yeah, and performances I think are great. Writing's great. Just a little bit flat direction for me, but I still think this is really good, and everybody should check it out. It's an incredibly compelling story, and for it to be as accurate as it is and show the inner workings of the politics without all the glamour, I find very interesting. So, yeah.
For you, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, the version of this that I make in my head, 5, maybe even
Absolutely.
Hell yeah.
No, I mean, it's this is so tough for me. It's like, I feel like I should just stick to my guns and say 5 because I love this movie and
Hell yeah.
I rewatch it. You know what? I just will. Fuck it. I do agree with obviously
The fuck it
everything
5
you've said.
is a very honorable position to take.
That's a strong move. Yeah.
I just did it a couple weeks ago on Bad Lieutenant, which is a movie that I've struggled with
that's
tons
also
of
a fucking
times.
5 for me.
I probably floored that like the first 3 times I watched it, and then on this recent watch I was like, do you know what, I love this movie too much.
Sometimes it takes me like 5 times to realize I actually just love it to death. So
yeah, and I love, my favorite author and my favorite books are George V. Higgins, and who wrote Friends of Eddie Coyle and Coogan's Trade, which became Killing Them Softly, and he's sort of the legend of Boston crime writing, and he's very sort of like Cormac McCarthy-esque, and it's all sparse, right? It's all sort of this sparse ground level, and so, Mike Newell's strange choice for this picture, not who I would have chosen, but certainly does a very admirable job of capturing just what sort of a grim existence this would be to have been in this crew, in the mob at this time. But I think it's wickedly funny, great performances, and I recommend it. So that's a fuck it 5 from me. And I recommend people check out the book 5 Families by Selwyn Rabb. It's the Bible in terms of this stuff, and it's what set me down this insane path of having all of this useless trivia. So, good book, recommend it, and I recommend this movie.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. I'm going to go check out that book. I've been in a reading kick lately, so I might actually go do that. But yeah, that'll wrap it up for everything this week, I think. That was Across 110th Street from 1972 and Donnie Brasco from 1997. Thanks so much, Nick, for joining us, for bringing these films with you. If you got anything to plug, this is where we have you do that.
It's total pleasure. Thank you for letting me take the time and the space to talk about movies I love. It's a pleasure to chat with you guys, as always. And
thank you.
I don't have anything to plug. I guess you can find me on Twitter. But check out those books, check out these movies, toss the boys some dollars on Patreon. They've earned it. And yeah, until next time.
Hell yeah. Well, for our listeners, we are going to be back in 1 week's time, where we are going to be doing your guys' bonus episode over on Patreon. We're going to be doing the one you guys voted on. We're going to be talking about Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye from 1973 alongside Joel and Ethan Coen's The Big Lebowski from 1998. We are going to be talking about 2 kind of leisurely films about kind of like an oddball outsider wandering through a world of greed and violence that they don't partake in. And it's going to be, it's going to be a big old fun episode. We're probably going to go super long on that.
Yep.
And then in 2 weeks' time, we are going to be back with a special guest where we're going to be going real grindhouse exploitation mode. We're going to be talking about Seeds from 1968, directed by Andy Milligan, and Blonde Death from, I think, 1984. And I haven't seen Blonde Death, but Seeds is one of the nastiest films I've ever seen. There's a Blu-ray of it out by Vinegar Syndrome that I picked up. And
of course.
That movie is like ostensibly like a family melodrama, like a coming home for the holidays style black and white film that becomes one of the filthiest no budget genre films I've ever seen. Just all sadistic 16mm close-ups of like bleeding wounds and incest and screaming and abortions and drowning and everything that you can think of. And it's like 70 minutes, so we're gonna be having a fun time.
Yeah, don't miss it.
The speaking of great taglines, since Nick brought up that he loved so much Across 110th Street's tagline, the tagline for Seeds: sowed in incest, harvested in hate.
Holy shit.
Wow.
That's like Cannibal Corpse lyrics or something. That's awesome.
Yes, so that's what we're going to be talking about in 2 weeks' time. Look forward to that. But I think that's going to be everything for this week. Thanks so much for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.